Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about front-end devs. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, don't you think that front-end developers, excluding full-stack developers, are constantly reinventing front-end approaches and using unimportant tools for the sole purpose of securing their jobs? Nope, not at all. I don't. There's not a lot of people I know that do that. Contrary to popular belief, I am actually, I argue that when you see someone doing some, especially in software development, but not exclusively, when you see someone do something that they're not supposed to be doing, or where they write really shitty code and so forth, it's usually not because they're trying to do it so that, you know, they're going to keep their job. That seems to me a little bit counterintuitive. It's mostly because they're really not that good. It's that simple. And what I like to say is that the cost that software companies pay, apart from salaries, by hiring the wrong software developers and so forth, is measured in legacy code. That's the real thing. Because let's face it, like when I started as a software developer, I didn't write exceptional code. Like, I mean, if you compare how I code now, I hope at the very least my coding skills would be a lot higher today than they were. And so, quote unquote, the cost that my employers had to pay for me to get to this level, well, that's all the shitty code I wrote. Now I know that the code, I hope at the very least, most of the code was working and so forth. So of course they got some benefit, like so forth. But as a craftsman, it doesn't matter which craft it is. It's the same thing if you were to do, wood carvings or whatever. Like, you're gonna have to go through quite a lot of wood before you're starting to carve something really, really nice looking, and that is a fact. And so that's usually what I see. So the reason why front-end developers have a lot of different tools, and like why you have this, like all this in the ecosystem, I argue, is because one part, the community is a lot larger than any other community. Like you mean there are languages that are big, like in terms of like how many people are using them and so forth. But if you think about just how massive, like JavaScript is the biggest language and most popular language in the world. Every single web application, all of them use front-end, all the front-end technologies. Most of the back-end systems use one flavor and so forth. Like, I'm not saying that it's not big, but if you compare it, like, it's not a competition in terms of how many people. The second thing that is worth knowing is that the people who do front-end is usually a more diverse range of skills. I'm not in any way saying that people are less skilled or so forth. I'm just saying that front-end is usually more accessible to a broader range of people. So you don't necessarily only have like die-hard engineers or things like that, and you have many different areas that you can look at in front-end. It has more, I argue, more dimensions to it than just pure backend coding. You have a lot of that stuff in operations and stuff like that. I'm just stating that there is a lot of stuff going on in front end for a very good reason. It's, as I like to say, a little bit like the Wild West. People are constantly trying to reinvent faster ways of loading websites, better frameworks, like all of this innovation, and it's really, really great, I argue. Like, I would say that that's the sort of innovation I wish you saw in more things in society. Like, one of my favorite things to say to my friends is that if we could get the people who invented the Elvish language or the Klingon language, like the guys and girls who sat down and actually invented a language for sci-fi and so forth, can't we just pay them to solve, I don't know, world hunger or something like that? That would be pretty great. I'm pretty sure that all the Dungeons and Dragons people are like the people who are like so nerdy into something that they will make an entire imaginary world and make it really seriously. These people, we need to bottle what they have and put it into other people, like finance people, or like people who try to, as I said, to that will benefit other parts of society, because that's the stuff that runs the world, or rather that's the stuff that, in my opinion, you should run the world on people like that. And so front end for me is the same thing. The thing that is tricky with front end, and the reason why things turn out this way, is because you have all this desire to innovate and experiment and so forth and so forth. But as I said, just as with the wood carvings, you know that, well, every time each iteration, like every time you fuck up, you're going to get a little bit better. But the cost is still there, and that's why frontend looks the way it does. Most frontend developers have a hard time, due to the ecosystem being so large and there's being so many things that they need to know and so forth, to find a stable way of delivering software. So you're constantly in this tug of war between what everybody in the community is experimenting with and what's trendy, what's hip. You're just trying to figure out, okay, what's going to work? Because you might have 1,000 people saying that this is the thing or this is the thing, and then you have another 1,000 people saying that this is the other thing. It's like shopping, like buying, shampoo or so forth. All of the labels, all of them are like amazing, and every product is amazing if you ask the people who are making it. But how do you, as the consumer, know what's going to work? And that is what comes back to experience, and that's why I argue that it's a very natural transition for a lot of, not just front-end, most people. The idea being the older you get, the more conservative you get, and I think that there is some truth to that. I've seen it in myself for sure. The trick part is here that the difference between, I argue, being complacent and being conservative is that complacency means that you're not keeping track. Like you're not updating yourself, not keeping like having a good look for and good feel for what's relevant and what's not very relevant, and that's dangerous because that leads to being outdated. The trick is to learn, like to do all these different carvings or like make all these fuck ups, right, and learn from them, so that you can notice when something is a really big deal and when somebody just tells you that that's a really big deal. And that's the thing that is happening front end. Like all those juniors, mid-levels and so forth, they're literally just trying to improve some aspect of their work. And just as kids, they're gonna play around with stuff, try stuff out, like have different fads that they follow and so forth and so forth, and then they're gonna start getting some favorites, and that's going to become an established thing, a bigger part of their identity. I really do think that that is the best analogy I can give you, that they're not trying to be malicious in order to keep a job. They're trying to grow up. That's what I would argue. So what I want you to take away from this is that no, I don't see the reasons behind front-end being in a state, or like all these different tools that don't work out and so forth for companies being a reason, like being due to job security purposes. I'm sure that it does happen. I've seen other things that happen for job security, and it's, I think, more reasonable to say that there are people who try to invent solutions or create value, like fluff value for companies, so that they can say that they are really busy and they're bringing all this revenue to a company and so forth, when they're really not doing anything very major. That's the thing I usually see. It's not like people just sit there and play, the front-end developers are just sitting there trying to just add tools so that nobody knows how the code works. That's not going to work either long term, because they have to still ship the thing. But it's much more common that you see like department heads or different groups of people, especially in the large organizations, who will, they will go on the hunt. They will try to like get projects from other teams, or like they will try to make themselves important in some way, so that when it's time to start shuffling people out or allocate budgets, they get some of that money, because even though they're doing like this tiny little thing, like in some cases, guys, I've seen departments where like you could literally fire everybody in that department and just replace them with a shell script, but that's not going to help them. So that's not a very good thing for them to admit. So they have to invent all this fluff and all these dependencies and buy a bunch of systems and stuff like that, so that they are important, because they have to have a lot of stuff in the ownership. Like they have to own stuff. That's really, really important. That means that you have job security, but having really shitty code due to that you're experimenting all the time and so forth, it usually isn't a malicious thing. What I see is, as I said, all I see is people who have less experience or so forth trying to figure out a better way of doing good work, or trying to figure out how to do something. And that is the thing that I see. I mean, it's the same thing I did. It's the same thing everybody does. You start out thinking that something is a good idea, you try it out, and then it turns out, well, that was not a really good idea. There were a few things that made sense, but that was overall not a great idea. And then you regret it, of course, and then you learn to the next time. The tricky part is, as I think, if you're going to do this well, if you want to be a little bit better at front end and handling these things, and it's not just front end, it's back end as well. The trick is to figure out how to reduce the cost of failure. That's what I always. That's the biggest wisdom that I can give you. When you're being experimental, when you're trying stuff out, when you're like trying so forth and so forth, try to put it in a state where you can do the experimentation and learn from it, without rotting the entire code base and crippling everything else. Don't go all in on something until you're pretty sure that you know how it's going to play out, if at all possible. Because as I've said before, guys, if the cost of undoing something is like that, then why would you not try it out? It would be stupid not to. The experiments that are very costly and dangerous, those are the ones you have to be careful with. But ideally you want to be in a state where you can just try stuff out and revert. Have a great day.